For the last time, Mrs. Davidson, this is a state-of-the-art composting system. It doesn't smell. I gestured to the sleek black container tucked neatly beside my herb garden. Karen wrinkled her nose like she was standing next to a landfill rather than my meticulously maintained backyard. Well, I can smell it from my patio, and it's ruining my afternoon tea experience. She turned to Officer Bennett, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. This has to violate some kind of health code. Officer Bennett sighed, clearly not his first rodeo with Karen. Ma'am, I don't see any violation here. The bin is well maintained and on private property. Karen's perfectly highlighted bob swung as she shook her head. My son works for the mayor, you know. He says these things attract rats and decrease property values. I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out that her son was a male clerk at City Hall who probably couldn't tell a zoning law from a parking ticket. Instead, I smiled. Would you like to see how it works? It's actually fascinating how... I don't need to see your garbage, thank you very much. She spun on her designer heel. This isn't over, Jamie. As she marched back to her yard, Officer Bennett gave me an apologetic shrug. Fourth call this month from her. Sorry about that. I watched Karen's retreating form and felt something shift inside me. She'd complained about my bird feeder, my herb garden lights, and now my compost bin. 3 strikes, Karen. Game on. My name is James Caldwell. Jamie to everyone except my mother and apparently Karen Davidson. 8 months ago, I was the owner and head chef of Harvest, one of Portland's up-and-coming farm-to-table restaurants. Then the pandemic hit, and like many restaurants operating on razor-thin margins, we didn't survive the closures. I'd poured everything into that place, my savings, my marriage, which had ended 2 years prior, and every waking hour. When it closed, it felt like losing a limb. After a month of wallowing in self-pity and sourdough experiments, I pulled myself together and pivoted to food blogging and recipe development from my newly purchased suburban home. Not as glamorous as running my own restaurant, but it kept me connected to my passion. You need to see this as an opportunity, not a setback. My best friend Miguel told me over beers the night after the compost confrontation. Miguel had been my sous chef at Harvest, and was now working at some corporate chain restaurant that made him wear 15 pieces of flair. An opportunity to what? Get cited by the neighborhood association for the crime of composting? I took a long swig of my IPA. You know she's filed complaints about my bird feeder and my solar garden lights, too? Miguel picked at the label on his beer bottle. Remember when that health inspector kept coming to Harvest because the vegan place next door kept reporting us, and you invited him to sit down for a full tasting menu? I smiled at the memory. He became one of our best customers. Exactly. You've always been good at turning critics into fans. This is different. Karen doesn't want to be converted, she wants conformity. I scrolled through my phone to show him the neighborhood association bylaws I'd been studying. Look at this. 64 pages of rules. There's a whole section on acceptable mailbox colors. So, what are you going to do? I was about to say nothing when my phone rang. Rachel, my agent who handled my cookbook deals and media appearances, rarely called after business hours unless it was important. Jamie, you're not going to believe this, Rachel exclaimed. Chef Antonia Williams is doing a 6-month sabbatical and looking for a unique space to run some exclusive cooking workshops. Something about connecting with real home cooks in an intimate setting. I almost dropped my phone into my beer. The Antonia Williams? The one with 3 TV shows and a restaurant empire? The very same. They're looking at a few locations in Portland next month. It's probably a long shot, but I submitted your name and blog. Your sustainable cooking angle fits her brand perfectly. As Rachel continued talking about logistics, my eyes drifted to Miguel, who was watching me curiously. An idea began to form, so wild and perfect it made me laugh out loud. Rachel, What if I offered my backyard, not just as a location, but as a full outdoor cooking school? Your backyard? But isn't it tiny? It's not huge, but it has potential. I thought of Karen's horrified face when she saw my compost bin. Serious potential. After hanging up, I explained my nascent plan to Miguel, who grinned wider with each detail. So let me get this straight, he said. Your neighbor complains about your compost bin, so your response is to turn your backyard into a gourmet cooking school with a celebrity chef? Go big or go home, right? And technically, I am home. Miguel raised his beer. To petty revenge and new beginnings. I clinked my glass against his. Mostly new beginnings, with just a dash of petty revenge for flavor. The next morning, I woke to find an official notice from the neighborhood association taped to my front door. The letter, signed by Association President Karen Davidson, cited an obscure bylaw about unsightly waste management systems visible from neighboring properties and gave me 7 days to remove my compost bin. I read it twice, then took a deep breath. Rather than fueling my anger, the notice crystallized my resolve. I spent the morning researching contractors and making calls. By afternoon, I'd scheduled a consultation with Marcus Johnson, who my research indicated was both highly skilled and known for taking on unconventional projects. I'd also reached out to my backyard neighbor, Lucia Chen, whose gardening blog I'd followed since moving in. So, let me get this straight, Marcus said 2 days later, walking the perimeter of my yard. You want to build a professional-grade outdoor kitchen, complete with a wood-fired oven, in your backyard, which happens to share a fence with the neighborhood association president who already hates your compost bin. That's the general idea, yes? Marcus stroked his beard thoughtfully. And this is because I'm a professional chef creating content for my food blog, I said with my most innocent expression. Uh-huh. Marcus glanced at the compost bin with the official violation notice now taped to it. Nothing to do with giving someone the middle finger in the most elaborate way possible? I grinned. That would be petty. I'm just pursuing my passion for outdoor cooking. Marcus laughed. I like you, man, and I hate HOAs. I'm in, but this isn't going to be cheap. I've been saving for a rainy day, and in Portland, that's pretty much every day. After Marcus left with measurements and a deposit, Lucia came over bearing seedlings and ideas. I've been wanting to meet you, she said, examining my herb garden with a professional eye. Your basil is thriving. Most people overwater it. I learned the hard way in culinary school, killed an entire crop. Lucia was in her early 40s, with an easy smile and dirt permanently embedded under her nails, despite her job as a software engineer. Her backyard was a testament to her skill, a riot of vegetables, flowers, and berry bushes that made my small herb garden look like amateur hour. Miguel mentioned your cooking school idea, she said. If you're serious, we should talk about expanding your garden. You'll want fresh ingredients. I'd love that. But fair warning, my neighbor has declared war on my compost bin. This project might put you in the line of fire. Lucia laughed. Mrs. Davidson has been trying to get me to remove my beehives for 2 years. I'm immune to her complaints. By the end of the week, I had submitted all the proper permits and plans to the city, meticulously ensuring everything was above board. If Karen wanted to play by the rules, I would too. I'd just find the rules that worked in my favor. The construction began the following Monday. Marcus and his crew arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, the earliest allowed by noise ordinances. By 8:17 a.m., Karen was in my driveway. You can't possibly be building a kitchen in your backyard, Karen said, arms crossed as she watched Marcus and his crew unload materials. Actually, I can. I have all the necessary permits. I handed her copies, which I'd prepared knowing she'd ask. The city was quite enthusiastic about my sustainable outdoor cooking concept. Karen snatched the papers. "This is ridiculous. The noise, the smells—" "Will all be well within neighborhood guidelines," I finished for her. I checked the bylaws quite thoroughly. Article 8, Section 3 specifically allows for outdoor cooking facilities as long as they meet city code. Her eyes narrowed. "You looked up the bylaws?" "I did. Fascinating reading. Did you know there's nothing in there that actually prohibits compost bins? I checked after receiving this." I tapped the violation notice still taped to my bin. Karen's face reddened. "The association board voted on an interpretation, not an actual rule. I've requested the meeting minutes, which as a homeowner, I'm entitled to see." For perhaps the first time since I'd met her, Karen was speechless. She finally recovered enough to say, "My son works for the mayor. Yes, I remember. Feel free to have him look over my permits. They're all in order." As she stormed off, Marcus whistled low. "Man, you came prepared for battle." Karen isn't the only one who can read rule books. Construction progressed steadily over the next 2 weeks. What had started as a modest outdoor kitchen concept grew more ambitious daily. Marcus was a genius with space utilization, creating custom countertops that folded away when not in use and building storage into every possible nook. Lucia worked magic in the garden, expanding my herb section and installing a vertical growing wall that would supply fresh greens year-round. The compost bin, rather than being removed, was redesigned to become an elegant feature of the garden, tiled to match the new outdoor space and integrated into the irrigation system. The day before Chef Antonia was scheduled to visit, Rachel called with unexpected news. "She's coming tomorrow, but there's a catch," Rachel said. "Food and Wine is doing a feature on her sabbatical. They're sending a photographer to document her location scouting." I looked around at my half-finished backyard. "Rachel, we're nowhere near ready." "It's fine. They want authenticity. A work in progress actually fits the narrative they're building about her connecting with home cooks." "If you say so." I hung up and immediately called Miguel. "I need backup. Chef Williams is coming tomorrow. With media." Miguel arrived an hour later with cleaning supplies and a determined expression. We worked until midnight, making the construction site as presentable as possible. Chef Antonia Williams was both exactly what I expected and nothing like her TV persona. She wore simple black pants and a white chef's jacket with no name embroidery, no need. Everyone in the culinary world knew who she was. Her hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore minimal makeup. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. "So, this is the famous backyard I've been hearing about," she said, surveying the half-finished outdoor kitchen. "Your agent wasn't kidding about it being a work in progress." "We're accelerating the timeline," I admitted. "When Rachel said you were interested, we kicked into high gear." Antonia walked around the space, occasionally stopping to examine something more closely. The herb garden, the orientation of the cooking stations, the view into neighboring yards. She paused at the compost bin, which I'd adorned with decorative tiles and integrated into the new design. "This is clever," she said, examining how the compost system fed the garden beds. "Most people hide these away." "I believe in making sustainable practices visible. It normalizes them." She gave me an appraising look. "I've watched some of your cooking videos. You've got solid technique and a good camera presence. But what really interests me is your philosophy. Farm to table is trendy, but you were doing it before your restaurant closed." I tried not to show my surprise that Chef Antonia Williams knew about my failed restaurant. "Sustainability isn't a marketing gimmick for me. It's how I cook, how I live." She nodded slowly. "I have 3 other locations to see in Portland, but—" She gestured around the yard. "There's something authentic here. Something real." Just then, Karen's voice sailed over the fence. "Is someone filming over there? You need a permit for commercial filming." Antonia raised an eyebrow. "And that would be—" "My neighbor. She's passionate about rules." "Ah," Antonia smiled knowingly. "Every good restaurant has at least one challenging neighbor. It's practically a requirement." The food and wine photographer captured the moment perfectly. Chef Antonia and I sharing a conspiratorial smile, while Karen's disapproving face peered over the fence in the background. That photo would later become the opening image for their feature article. 3 days later, Rachel called with the news. Chef Antonia had chosen my backyard for her workshop series. "She said your location had soul and authenticity," Rachel reported. "But she has some specific requirements. You two should discuss directly." That evening, Chef Antonia and I had a video call that would dramatically alter my plans. "If we're doing this, we're really doing this," Antonia said over video chat. "I want a true outdoor classroom, multiple cooking stations, not just one demonstration area, room for at least 8 students." I stared at my yard plan. "That's going to be tight in the space we have." "Then we get creative with the design, vertical elements, multi-use stations. I've taught in smaller spaces on TV sets." "Okay, but there's also the issue of the neighbors, specifically one neighbor." "The rule enforcer? All the more reason to make sure everything we do is above board and exceptional quality." Antonia leaned closer to the camera. "Look, Jamie, I chose your location for a reason. Your approach to food aligns with my vision, but also I recognize that hunger in your eyes. You lost your restaurant. I know what that's like." I was startled. "You do?" "My first place in Chicago. Health department shut it down because the landlord neglected the building. I was 29 and thought my career was over." She shook her head at the memory. "Sometimes you need to rebuild in unexpected ways. This cooking school could be that for you." I looked at the plans again, my mind already reconfiguring the space. "All right, let's go big." The next month was a blur of construction, permit applications, and increasingly frantic complaints from Karen. Marcus brought in additional crew to accelerate the timeline. The garden expanded under Lucia's expert guidance. My modest compost system evolved into a multi-stage processing center that would support both the cooking school and the expanded garden. Karen's resistance escalated in proportion to our progress. She began filing daily complaints with the city. Noise violations, potential fire hazards from the wood-fired oven, concerns about commercial activity in a residential area. Officer Bennett became such a regular visitor that we started keeping coffee ready for him. "Mr. Caldwell, I have another complaint about—" Officer Bennett stopped mid-sentence as he entered the backyard. "Whoa, this is not what I expected." "Different from the fire hazard eyesore Mrs. Davidson described?" I asked. He walked around, taking in the gleaming countertops, the brick oven, the living herb wall. "This is professional grade, better than some restaurants I've seen." "That's the idea. We're launching a cooking school next month with Chef Antonia Williams." Officer Bennett's professional demeanor slipped. "The Chef Williams? My wife loves her show." "The very same. We'll be teaching sustainable cooking practices, zero-waste techniques." I picked a sprig of basil from the herb wall. "Would you like a tour of what we've built, since you're here anyway?" 30 minutes later, Officer Bennett was sampling freshly baked flatbread from our test run of the wood-fired oven. "So," I said casually, "about that complaint?" He wiped his hands on a napkin. "What complaint? I don't see any violations here. Just a very impressive home improvement project." He hesitated. "Though, any chance you might have space in one of those cooking classes? My wife's birthday is coming up." I smiled. "I think we could arrange something." With the official opening just 2 weeks away, Karen made her most aggressive move yet. She organized an emergency neighborhood association meeting to address commercial activities in residential areas. Thinly veiled code for my cooking school, Miguel and I prepared our counter-strike carefully. On the night of the meeting, we arrived at the community center with a cart loaded with food prepared in my nearly completed outdoor kitchen. Karen stood at the front of the community center, pointer in hand, as she flipped through a slide presentation of my backyard transformation. As you can see, what started as a simple outdoor kitchen has morphed into a full commercial operation. She clicked to a slide showing the compost bin. It all began with this unsightly and potentially unhygienic addition to the neighborhood. I had to admire her thorough documentation. She'd basically created a time-lapse of my project through fence surveillance. The bylaws clearly state that commercial enterprises cannot operate within our residential community, she continued. The increased traffic, noise, and cooking odors will affect all of our property values. When she finally finished, I wheeled in the cart that Miguel and I had prepared. Before the vote, I thought you might like to sample some of what we'll be teaching. The spread was calculated to impress. Miniature flatbreads with garden vegetables, tiny cups of seasonal soup, herb-infused waters, all created with ingredients from my garden or local sustainable sources. As people hesitantly approached the food table, I made my case. Everything you're tasting was made in my outdoor kitchen, using herbs and vegetables grown in my garden. The cooking school will be small, maximum 8 students per class, with limited sessions each month. I passed around brochures featuring Chef Antonia. This is an opportunity to have a nationally recognized chef, bringing positive attention to our neighborhood. The workshops focus on sustainable cooking practices that actually improve the environment. Mrs. Abernathy, who lived 3 doors down from me, looked up from her second flatbread. "This is delicious. And you say Chef Williams will be teaching personally?" Yes. She selected our location specifically for its authenticity and sustainable design. "My daughter is a huge fan," Mrs. Abernathy said thoughtfully. "She's been trying to get a reservation at Williams' San Francisco restaurant for months." "Property values," Patricia sputtered. "Think of the property values." Mr. Jimenez, a retired real estate agent who rarely spoke at these meetings, cleared his throat. "Actually, unique features like this tend to increase property values, not decrease them, especially with a celebrity connection." The tide was turning. I could see it in the way neighbors lingered by the food cart, in their questions about class schedules, in Karen's increasingly desperate attempts to refocus on bylaws and regulations. The vote to prohibit commercial cooking activities was defeated 27-3. Karen looked shell-shocked. The week before our official opening, Chef Antonia posted about the upcoming workshops on her social media channels. The response was overwhelming. All classes for the first month sold out within hours. Local news picked up the story, and Channel 8 sent reporter Emily Chen to do a feature. We were just wrapping up the interview when Karen appeared, marching across my lawn directly into the camera frame. "Are you with the news? I have some things to say about this illegal operation." The camera operator, sensing drama, kept rolling as Emily smoothly pivoted. "And you are?" "Karen Davidson, president of the Neighborhood Association. What's happening here is a clear violation of residential zoning laws." Emily maintained her professional smile. "Mrs. Davidson, we reached out to city officials before this interview. They confirmed that Mr. Caldwell has all the proper permits for an educational facility." That's impossible." Karen looked genuinely shocked. "My son works for the mayor's office. He said—" "Your son is a mail clerk, Karen," I interjected gently. "He doesn't handle zoning or permits." The camera caught her expression perfectly. the moment of realization that her often-cited connection might not be as influential as she'd claimed. Emily, sensing a story angle, pressed on. Mrs. Davidson, residents we spoke with seemed largely supportive of the cooking school, especially with Chef Antonia Williams involved. What specific concerns do you have? It's the principal, Karen sputtered. Today it's cooking classes. Tomorrow, who knows, rock concerts, petting zoos? Even Emily couldn't maintain her neutral expression at that point. A petting zoo? The clip of Karen's petting zoo comment became a meme within hours, accompanied by a popular food blogger's detailed story about the neighborhood cooking war. The narrative framed it as a classic David versus Goliath tale of food sustainability against rigid regulations, with Karen cast firmly as Goliath. The first official cooking workshop exceeded all expectations. 8 eager students, including Officer Bennett and his wife, gathered in my backyard to learn zero-waste cooking techniques from Chef Antonia. Welcome to our first farm-to-table fundamentals workshop, Antonia began, standing at the main cooking station. Today, we're going to explore how to use every part of the ingredients we grow and source. For the next 3 hours, the students chopped, sautéed, and baked under Antonia's expert guidance. I moved between stations, offering assistance and collecting food scraps for the compost system. This is the part most cooking classes ignore, I explained, showing them how to layer the compost materials. But it's the foundation of sustainable cooking. Today's scraps become tomorrow's ingredients. The students were captivated, not just by Chef Antonia's celebrity status, but by the entire experience. Standing in a real garden, cooking with ingredients harvested minutes before, understanding the complete cycle of food production. This is amazing, Mrs. Bennett gushed as she sampled her own creation. I've watched cooking shows for years, but I never understood how it all connects until today. As the class wrapped up, I noticed Karen watching from her window. Our eyes met briefly before she disappeared behind her curtain. Instead of satisfaction at her defeat, I felt an unexpected twinge of something. Not quite guilt, but close. That evening, after the students had gone and Chef Antonia had retired to her hotel, I sat in my garden with a glass of wine, contemplating my victory. It felt hollow somehow. The next morning I made a decision. I wrote a handwritten invitation and walked next door. Karen stared at the invitation like it might bite her. This has to be some kind of trick. It's not, I assured her, standing on her immaculate porch where I'd never been invited before. It's a private workshop, just you. Why would I want to learn cooking from you? Not from me, from Chef Antonia. She specifically requested to teach you after I told her about your garden. This caught Karen off guard. My garden? Your roses are spectacular. Antonia has been working on edible flowers for her new cookbook. She noticed them from our yard and was impressed with the varieties you've cultivated. Karen's expression softened just slightly. Well, I have won the Garden Club Award 3 years running. Exactly. This workshop is about incorporating edible flowers into sustainable cooking. Antonia thought you might have unique insights. I could see her internal struggle, suspicious of my motives but tempted by the exclusive opportunity with a celebrity chef. Vanity won out. Fine. But if this is some kind of public humiliation. It's a private class, Karen. Just you, me, and Chef Antonia. 2 days later, Karen arrived at my back gate precisely at the appointed time, dressed as if for a garden club meeting rather than a cooking class. Chef Antonia greeted her warmly, admiring the selection of roses Karen had brought from her garden. The workshop began tensely, with Karen following instructions stiffly and speaking only when directly addressed. But gradually, as Antonia expertly drew her out with questions about rose varieties and growing techniques, Karen began to relax. "The Persian yellow has the most intense flavor," Karen explained, carefully separating petals. "But you have to harvest at exactly the right time." Antonia nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of expertise that makes the difference between good cooking and exceptional cooking. Timing is everything." By the time we moved to the compost demonstration, Karen was fully engaged in the process. "The secret to this particular compost blend," I explained, showing Karen how to layer the ingredients, "is balancing your greens and browns. It's actually very similar to building a good garden soil for roses." Karen peered into the bin with reluctant interest. "My roses do need better soil amendment than what I've been buying." Chef Antonia nodded. "Jamie's compost creates some of the richest growing medium I've seen outside professional operations. It's why his herbs have such intense flavor." Karen tentatively touched the finished compost. "And it really doesn't smell?" "Only like good earth," Antonia assured her. "A properly maintained compost bin shouldn't stink." Karen straightened up, making a decision. "Show me how to build one. A small one, for my rose petals and kitchen scraps." I nearly dropped the compost sifter. "You want a compost bin?" "A tasteful one," she clarified. "If it's going to be in my yard, it needs to match my garden aesthetic." I caught Antonia's eye, and she gave me a subtle nod that said, "Take the win." "I think we can design something perfect for your space, Karen." Over the following weeks, a surprising partnership formed. Karen, with her organizational skills and attention to detail, helped streamline the workshop scheduling to minimize disruption to the neighborhood. I designed a custom compost system for her rose garden, and Marcus built it with the same care he'd put into my kitchen. The workshops continued to gain popularity, with waiting lists growing for each session. Chef Antonia extended her residency, finding unexpected joy in teaching intimate classes rather than performing for large audiences. "This is what cooking should be," she told me one evening as we prepared for the next day's class. "Connected to the earth, to the community." Karen gradually became more involved, eventually leading a workshop on edible flowers that sold out faster than any previous class. Her transition from nemesis to partner was so complete that new students often assumed she had been part of the project from the beginning. 6 months after that first confrontation over my compost bin, we hosted a neighborhood potluck in my backyard. The yard was filled with neighbors sharing dishes they'd learned to make in our various workshops. Marcus was showing off the newest addition to the outdoor kitchen, a custom pizza oven he designed. Lucia and her garden club members were exchanging seedlings by the expanded community garden beds we'd started. And there was Karen, explaining to a newcomer how the neighborhood's composting program worked, gesturing to the decorative bin system we'd designed together. "Never thought you two would end up as partners," Miguel said, handing me a drink. "From compost enemies to compost evangelists." I watched as Karen laughed at something Officer Bennett's wife said. A genuine laugh I never would have thought possible 6 months ago. "Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all," I replied. "It's finding common ground." "In this case, literal ground," Miguel quipped, pointing to the compost. I raised my glass toward Karen, who noticed and raised hers in return. "To unexpected harvests," I called out. "To unexpected harvests," the gathered neighbors echoed. What had started as a petty response to a neighbor's complaint had grown into something I'd been missing since losing my restaurant. A community built around good food and sustainable practices. It turned out that the most satisfying recipe of all was the one I'd never planned to create. As the sun set over our gathering, I caught Chef Antonia watching me with a knowing smile. "So," she said quietly, I've been talking with some investors who are interested in a restaurant concept built around this cooking school model. I smiled back. From compost to community to a new beginning. The best dishes always have layers of flavor.